Recording in progress.
Welcome and good evening, everyone. We're glad you're here. We are back for another night. The month of May, we're really focused on eating and nutrition habits. So if you're in the middle of your Optifast journey or doing meal replacements with us, this is a great opportunity for you to think about some of your previous habits and how you kind of put a big separation and kind of a big break in the middle of those habits, and then how you want to restart those habits in the coming months as we reintroduce food and good nutrition habits. So tonight is less about nutrition. We're actually going to talk a lot about nutrition in the next couple of weeks, just the really real specific parts of nutrition, the different pieces of your meals, why they're each important, and what kind of quantities you want to be looking for in those. Tonight is a lot more about our approach to eating. So we're talking about eating awareness. And in so doing, I hope you find some good pieces of information here that will kind of help you reset your mindset and your habits going forward. So let's get started and dive into our material. As usual, please grab your webinar workbooks if you have them. We're going to do some writing tonight as we kind of reflect on some things. Let's get started with our fun facts of the night. Did you know that food makes us feel good in the moment because eating releases dopamine into the brain? So if you're wondering why you stress eat, or why you automatically reach for food when you're tired or overwhelmed or anxious about something, that's because your brain is trained to reach for the things that will give off that dopamine hit, and food can do that. Now, just like a drug, like any other drug, and food can be kind of considered that way because of the chemicals that it releases. Just like a drug, that hit is only temporary, and it will require more hits when it wears off in only 20 to 30 minutes. That's why it's so important that we focus on our relationship with food as something that we use as a tool to nourish our body, sometimes to enjoy gatherings and things like that, but not as a means to relieve stress or calm our emotions, right? And that's part of what we're learning, because it really is effective in the moment, but the repercussions can be pretty great. So we're going to talk a little bit about that by leading into our little talk on stress. Now, I just want to mention that I sense the irony of this, because I think this week for me has been one of my most stressful in a long time, so I think it's a little ironic that I'm talking about stress tonight, but I just want you to know that I'm right there with you learning these lessons, and I think that I'm going to benefit as much from this as anybody else tonight. So let's dive in and talk about this. I actually love to talk about stress management, maybe because I have so much work still to do on it, but I think it's so empowering to understand why we get stressed, what it means for our bodies, how to recognize those signs of stress, and then how to manage them. If we can do that, there's so much power in that. Okay, so let's start by just taking a little bit of introspection here. I want you to, if you're joining us on YouTube, you can't see this slide, so I'm just going to read this off, but take a second with your workbooks. If you don't have a workbook with you, take a pen and paper, and just think for a second, jot down which thing on this list, or things on this list, or maybe something that you can think of that's not on this list, are your current biggest life stressors. Is it work? Is it family responsibilities? Maybe you're at home with a bunch of young children, or maybe it's teenagers. Maybe even you're an empty nester, but you have adult children that are struggling, and that can be a huge source of stress as well. You actually have less control at that point, but it's just as painful and overwhelming. Maybe you're in the middle of a stressful or strained relationship. Maybe you are lonely and lack quality relationships, and that can feel really stressful. Maybe you just have way too much going on, way too much on your to-do list, and you're just kind of in a constant state of overwhelm. Maybe it's physical or mental health concerns. Maybe you're living in a state of fear for a variety of reasons. Or what else can you think of, without it being too personal if you want to share, or if you can just think of something that might apply to somebody else. Hypothetically, what could those be? And just take just a second. I'm going to let you look at that list. Just take just a second and think about what they are for you, and write those down. And Amy, I love that point. Stress is not always a negative situation. We're actually going to talk about that next. So keep that in mind. We're going to explore that idea, because that is so true. Okay, question number 2. How can you tell when you are stressed out? Now, this is a little bit of a trick question. What I have learned about stress over the years is sometimes you have the obvious signs that you're stressed out. But a lot of the time, one of the biggest problems with stress is that we don't even realize how much stress we are under until sometimes it comes out in ways that we don't want it to later. So really take a second and think about this question. Are there ways that your body or your emotions or your reactions show stress that you're not even maybe always completely aware of? One of my big goals this year has been to be able to slow down enough to sense when my body is stressed in ways that I don't even usually take time to recognize. A lot of times we push those symptoms back, we try to ignore them, we try to push through. But what are the ways that you can tell when you are stressed out? Think about that just for a second. Share if you'd like to. I love these responses, Michael. I think that's a pretty common feeling. I think sometimes when we stop and think about it, we're more stressed than we actually realize, and it can be a lot more than we realize. We're actually going to do an entire webinar that just addresses stress next month, actually at the end of June. And Sarah mentions having trouble taking a deep breath. I can definitely relate to that. Impatient, short temper, heart rate, right? The whole body gets tense. And again, like, have you ever had that experience where your whole body is tense and you don't even realize it until it's too late? Maybe you explode at somebody or start crying or you know, even reach the level of panic attack. Sometimes we think, man, I've been stressed for a long time and I didn't even realize it. My sister mentioned that she had years of stress that she didn't realize she was hanging on to, and she felt it in her stomach. So it was interesting. Years ago, I got the opportunity to be a community health nurse for the missionaries of our church. And there were about, I can't even remember now, several hundred missionaries that were under my care, and they would call me every day with health concerns. And I would call our church headquarters regularly and ask for permission to run tests or all kinds of things that I wanted covered. And what I learned from that experience was that 95%, I'm throwing out that number, but it was pretty close to that, of headaches, stomach aches, aches of any kind, they were almost always stress related. So sometimes just those physical symptoms we don't even recognize that can be related to stress. Okay, so then third question, what do you turn to when you're stressed? And stop and think about this one for a minute too. You might think that you have an answer right off the top of your head, but what for example, I noticed a couple of weeks ago, because I decided to take a social media fast, and so I stopped turning to my social media. What I learned from that was that I had no idea. Every time I got stressed, my automatic unconscious response was to pick up my phone and click on social media. I think it was probably the quick dopamine hit that social media often gives us. But what is it, if you think about it for a second, what is your automatic thing? Some of us, it's food, right? We get stressed, we look for that dopamine hit of putting something in our mouth. What is it that you turn to when you're stressed? Take just a second and think about it. Share if you'd like. I love these responses, and Carol, I invite you to come to my house and deep clean anytime you're stressed. I appreciate productive stress responses like that. I wish that was my stress response. I think those are great. And I think it is important to recognize that all of our responses to stress are not unhealthy. But it's good to start to really watch and recognize what your responses to stress are, so you can make that determination. Is this a healthy response to stress that is improving my life? Or is it an unhealthy one that I can start to learn new skills and coping mechanisms to deal with that stress? And again, we're going to talk more about stress in coming weeks, but just a few more thoughts about stress. We know that our brains are trained to seek out dopamine in stressful situations. That's why we automatically reach for the things that are going to give us those dopamine hits. Our brains are trained to do that, right? We also know that eating releases dopamine into our brains, which is a lot of times why eating becomes our response to stress. But we also know that a lot of the things that give us those quick releases of dopamine can make us feel better in the moment, but they wear off quickly, and then they require more dopamine, and oftentimes that's how we get into addictive tendencies that can hurt us. So this is the real key I want you to take away from this talk, though, as we don't talk much more about stress tonight. Maybe our focus on healthy eating is sometimes reversed to where it should be. We focus so much on self-discipline. If we can just develop the skills and the self-discipline to only eat the things that are going to support our goals, this is a discipline issue, then we can meet those goals. But what if we reverse that and say really what we need to focus on is stress management first? Because if we get our stress under control, then the discipline to make the choices that we want to is going to be so much more within our grasp, right? So let's focus on stress management first and self-discipline second when we have the wherewithal to be able to make those choices better. Okay, so let's talk. I did say we were almost done with stress management, but just a few tips on stress management before we move on to some of these tips for how to be aware of our eating habits. The first thing you can do with stress management is start avoiding stress where you can. Now, I want you to think of this avoid in terms of what's something that's an easy X out, right? If we're looking down this list and these are more complicated and more nuanced and it's not that easy, then we're going to move on to the next list. But this is just like, look down your list of things that you have to do during the day, things that are stressing you out. What is an easy one to cross off the list? Is there a person in your life, now it can't be your husband or wife, or your children, or somebody that you have an obligation and a commitment to, right? That we're going to work through those relationships. But this is somebody maybe at work that you can avoid a little bit more. Maybe someone that's just not contributing to your happiness and well-being. You can avoid some of those people that are maybe energy sucks to you, right? Maybe leaving too late for work. If you're always stressed getting to work too late. Now, we're going to talk for a second about the next step. If that's not as simple as it seems, then maybe that's not the thing that you can automatically change. Maybe you're just taking on too many projects or outside activities. Can you just cross some of those off the list? Can you simplify your life? And maybe just avoiding some discussions about uncomfortable topics. You can't always, and you shouldn't always do this, but are there some that aren't really necessary that you could avoid to manage your stress a little bit better? Okay, so for the things that we shouldn't avoid or don't want to avoid or can't avoid, then we alter, right? If you can't avoid or if you shouldn't avoid, then alter. So think about, this is something that's going to require you to change your environment. You can't just avoid it. You can't get rid of it. So now we've got to tweak the environment, right? So maybe you talk to somebody about how you're feeling. This is where we have commitments to relationships, right? We're not trying to avoid those relationships, but we're trying to alter or adjust or change these for the better. So communication, right? Maybe asking someone to change a behavior that's very stressful for you, and within reason, obviously taking responsibility for your own actions and feelings as well. Maybe you just get rid of your junk food drawer, right? That's an easy way to alter an environment to make your choices easier on the back end. Okay, so we talked about avoiding being late for work. Maybe that's an easy change, maybe it's not. If it's not an easy change for you, then this is where you alter your skills. This is going to take some work, right? Maybe you work on your time management skills so that you can be on time to work and maybe avoid those stressful situations. And if you have to have a confrontation, if it's not appropriate to avoid it, like we said in the slide before, maybe you rehearse those things, maybe you talk through it with somebody so that when you go into that conversation that's necessary, that you have more confidence and it's not as stressful for you. So think about the stressors in your life that you can alter. Okay, go ahead and share them if you want to as we keep moving here. And then in situations that you can't avoid or alter, this is the really tricky one, and this is probably the one that takes the most skills. So we develop these skills, but it's also the one that's the most empowering because you have the most control over it, and that's where you adapt yourself to the situation to reduce stress. Okay, so we're adapting our thoughts. Okay, so we're focusing on gratitude. This is really good for me this week. We're putting things into perspective, right? Is this going to matter tomorrow? Is it going to matter next week, next year? Is this even going to be an issue? Can we back up, kind of get rid of that myopic view and recognize all of the things that are going well? And then that gives us more power and more ability to deal with the things that are not going well, right? That are stressful for us. Maybe we adapt our feelings, and we can do that by practicing some of these mindfulness practices that we've talked about. Taking time, prioritizing our mental health by making time for relaxation. That's so important, and we're so bad at it, most of us, right? meditation, getting enough sleep, right? If you're short on time and don't feel like you have a half-hour meditation in you, counting to 10 and taking some slow, deep breaths, that's just that one action improves oxygen levels in your brain, can calm your heart rate down, like Chelsea was mentioning. We can do simple and small things that can reduce our stress in the moment even. Exercise is huge. I think we mentioned this last week on the webinar, but there are studies that show that exercise is much more effective for anxiety and depression than medications. Isn't that amazing? So again, prioritizing our mental and our physical health by making that a priority. Guided imagery is imagining yourself somewhere calm and pleasant. And then the third category would be adapting our actions. So we adapt our thoughts, we adapt our feelings, and our emotions, and then we adapt our actions. So taking yourself out of stressful situations where that's possible. You could argue that that's also avoidance. Talking to someone you trust about how you feel, whether that's a trusted family member or a therapist or a doctor, lots of options there. And then educating yourself, right? Seeking more information and advice. So there are a lot of things that we have the power to control, even when we can't control our environment or the things that are happening to us. Now, this is an important thing to recognize about stress, and this is going to probably put you initially on the defensive, but I want you to take a breath and step back and ask yourself this question. How are you viewing your own stress, okay? Do you ever view your stress as an excuse? And again, recognize here that I am not saying having anxiety is an excuse. It's not. Anxiety is a real condition. Most of us have anxiety to an extent. All of us experience anxiety. And some people have anxiety to an extent that it is crippling and debilitating for them. And I am not in any way saying that that is an excuse. What I am saying is that using that as an excuse not to manage your stress and your anxiety can be also detrimental to your progress, right? So if you are somebody who struggles with anxiety, then let's treat the anxiety and let's learn the skills that we need to deal with that and to manage that, whether that's with medication or therapy or just a combination of learning some of the skills that we've talked about, right? So are we using it as an excuse to not move forward with our goals? Are we using it as a badge of honor? I see this all the time and I know I've been guilty of it. Does it make us feel a little bit good? I am so stressed out because I'm juggling all of these things. Somehow that makes us feel good about ourselves, right? Are we using it as a badge of honor? Like, we're not really trying to manage our stress because it means something that we're stressed, right? This is an interesting one that just occurred to me today, actually. Do we ever use stress as a punishment? Like, we kind of get in our heads that we deserve to feel stressed because of maybe we've made some choices we're not proud of, or maybe we don't feel like we're managing our life very well, and so stress feels like a way to punish our brains and our bodies. Do we ever do that? And then maybe we see ourselves as a stressed out person, and so that holds us back from learning techniques to manage that stress. We label ourselves as I'm just a high stress person. So think about that honestly for a second. Maybe write down some thoughts if those thoughts have come to your mind about maybe some of these mental barriers that you're creating for managing your own stress. And then here's the slide for Amy, right? I think it's really essential that we understand that stress is not bad in and of itself. In fact, stress is essential to our progress. It's that having that healthy balance. Now, if you remember several months ago when we talked about our comfort zone and how there's no growth within our comfort zone, I think it's important to realize that there is no getting out of our comfort zone without a little bit of stress, or sometimes a lot of stress, right? Think about how stress improves our physical performance, right? Anytime, and we push muscle building a lot with fat loss, don't we? But I mean, muscle building in and of itself is stress. You are stressing your muscles in order to help them to grow. Anything that you've achieved in your life, I'm guessing there was stress involved with that. And anything that you have grown or changed or developed or improved at, that included some stress to be able to get there. Stress can catalyze our growth, whether that's physical growth, mental growth, emotional growth, our growth as a person. All of it involves some degree of stress. And stress is really that catalyst that pushes us forward into growth. It can be a really helpful tool, that it becomes negative when our bodies are in a constant state of stress, when we don't know how to move out of that state of stress. And then what happens is these hormones flood our body, these fight or flight hormones that are designed to keep us safe from danger and to and to help us protect ourselves, right? And to help us move forward. Those good hormones that are supposed to be there for a purpose never leave, never calm down. And then we're in this constant state of anxiety and fear and frustration, and that is where it becomes an impedance to us. So we have to learn to accept stress and then manage it in healthy ways, right? So think for just a minute, what are the healthy stressors in your life? And maybe take just a second to write that down as well. And while we do that, I'm going to circle back to this slide, returning to adapt. Sometimes we don't want, or we shouldn't want, to avoid or alter the stress. And that's where we manage our stress, our healthy stressors, by adapting ourselves to the situation. So think just for a second about what are some of your healthy stressors and how can you avoid and alter the ones that maybe aren't as healthy for you, and then how can you adapt to manage the stresses that are healthy so that you can manage that well. Give you just a second to think about that. I know we're moving kind of fast tonight. I encourage you, when these webinars end, to go back and reflect on the things that we've talked about and continue to write the notes about the things that you've learned and the things that have occurred to you as we've gone through this, because everyone's insights are going to be different based on their own experiences. Okay, so now that we've managed our stress just like that in the last 15 minutes, right, we're set to go, we can start making choices about food that are not related to stress and anxiety and emotions, right? And this is where we can start to really approach our food decisions more rationally. Okay, here are just some simple suggestions for habits that you can start to employ to manage your eating in healthy ways. And there are going to be a lot of suggestions here, and I don't think that even the healthiest of people maybe necessarily have to adopt every single one of these. So as you look at these lists, pick a couple that you think, you know what, I can do that. I can make that change. It doesn't have to be every single one, especially not at first. And if you're coming from a place where all of these suggestions would be major life changes for you, then recognize that it is a much healthier approach to only be picking one or two to start with. And then that snowballs into more healthy decisions. So with that in mind, let's talk about goal-supported eating. The idea behind goal-supported eating is that we are making mindful decisions about the food that we put into our mouths. And we're asking ourselves the question, does this food support my weight management goals? You know, and we're going to talk about the foods in a second that don't and how you manage that too, because certainly not everything you ever eat is going to be 100% in support of your weight management goals, and that's okay as long as we're following kind of that 80-20-90-10 rule. But let's just talk about goal-supported eating for a second. We could go through 4 Ps here, having a plan, and we talk about this all the time, don't we? That mindfulness is really key, just being intentional and not letting food make the decisions for you, right? So have a plan, know how you're going to handle tricky situations ahead of time, whether that's parties or trips. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that every party and every trip you go on, you're going to stay 100% on plan, but having a plan for what you're going to do in those situations is going to help you be more mindful. Portion control, okay? So say you do go to a party and you say, you know what, every year my neighbor throws a pie party, and I would like to go and enjoy that, but my portion is going to look like this, and you're going to decide that ahead of time, right? Proportionate, eating a wide variety of foods with a heavy emphasis on plant-based, eating the rainbow, right, as we call it. We want at least 80 to 90% of our food to be fresh and plant-based and non-processed if possible. And then proper place, and we're going to talk about this in a minute too. Just committing to where you're going to eat can make a big difference. Okay, now we're going to talk about goal-thwarted eating for a minute. Now, this is less about what you eat and more about the habits of how you're going to eat the things that are not necessarily on your plan for goal-supported eating, right? Here are the things that you want to avoid. These are 6 G's, okay? Grazing. So that means just as you walk by, you're just kind of mindlessly picking up whatever is in sight. Grab and go when you're in a hurry, and I've certainly been guilty of that even this week, where you're just in a huge hurry, you've got to get out the door and you just grab whatever's there without planning it. I think the other piece to both of those first ones is just that we are so unaware usually of how much we're eating in those situations. Gulping and gorging, that's, fast eating without, again, keeping track. And then goodies, right? We know that goodies are okay in moderation sometimes, but if we're eating them every day, several times a week, then it can be hard to maintain our weight. So, suggestion number 2, mindful decisions about supporting foods. Now, just before you eat, and I love this about Optifast, that it breaks our habits completely and it makes us more aware. So when I was doing Optifast, I was shocked at how many times a day I was reaching for food without realizing it. And so then that really helped me when I came back to food to say, I've now broken that habit. It took me a few days, maybe even a week, to stop thinking about that all the time. But once that habit was broken, I could go back into food much more intentionally and say, okay, well, now I don't need to be just grazing all of the time, right? So stop. You use that as an opportunity to be more mindful, right? Now that you're out of that habit of grazing, it's not so hard to remember every time you put food in your mouth. Be mindful about the things that you do. Ask yourself, is what I'm going to eat going to support my weight management goals? Now, here's the great part. This is where we take away the guilt. If we're not eating because of emotion and stress, then we could ask this question, and if it supports your goals, then you eat it in the right quantities for your calorie goals. And if the answer is that it doesn't support, then let's differentiate first between thwarting tactics versus a productive purpose. Okay, so if it doesn't support it, are you just doing it because it's there? And do you really need to do that? Are you doing it because you're stressed or because you're emotional? Or are you doing it because you're going to enjoy a party with friends, or because you're on a trip and you want to enjoy the local food, or because you're having a family gathering for a holiday or for a birthday party? Those are other reasons to enjoy food at times and in appropriate quantities, right? And it's okay to say, you know what, this instance is not a goal-supported instance, but it is for this other purpose. And if we're aware of that, and we're not doing that every day or every week, even all the time, then it's not going to take away from our goals long term. So then we make a mindful decision in those cases with a cutoff point. Okay, I want to enjoy this trip that I'm going on, and these are my goals for how I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll have Optifast for breakfast and lunch, and then I'll go out to dinner and really enjoy that. Or there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. And one of the things that Dr. Shill does with our patients is he will walk you through all of those exceptions and help you to really enjoy those opportunities and those activities without derailing your goals. Okay. Okay. So suggestion number 3, if you're eating out, here's a few tips. And we actually do an entire webinar all about eating out in July, so we can go into a lot more detail there. But here's just some quick tips on this. Deciding on your restaurant beforehand with healthy options, and then looking at the menu ahead of time. Deciding before you're sitting there starving can really help. And then portion control is huge at restaurants. One of the reasons that restaurants can be so difficult for weight management is because the portions are so much larger than what you would eat at home. So if you want to go out and enjoy a dish that may not even be on your normal meal plan, then consider starting with a to-go box and maybe just eating a portion of it, putting the rest of it away from the beginning so you don't overeat, or splitting with a friend, or ordering their lunch size. So there's so many options that can help you still enjoy that experience without feeling like you've lost all of your progress. Okay, suggestion number 4. I really like this, and this is a lot of different suggestions that these are just little tweaks to your schedule that you can make. And again, you're not going to want to change every single one of these, right? And that's okay. But could you change 3 or 4 of them? Is it, are there 3 or 4 on this list that you think that's so manageable for me? I don't feel like I'm missing out on my quality of life by changing these things. So here's just some suggestions. Could you make a commitment that you're just not going to eat while you're standing up? I mean, I love that, right? Because how much are you going to miss out on in life if you just agree to sit down while you eat? But it can make a big difference, right? You're not going to eat in the car. And there's double benefits to that. I mean, I am all for that one. No eating in bed. That was actually when years and years ago we cut out just that one little thing, right? Just don't eat while you're in bed. If you're going to eat, go downstairs and sit at the table. No eating while watching TV. Only eating at the table. So again, you could just say, I'll eat, birthday cake with my kid on his birthday, but I'm only going to eat it while I'm sitting at the table. And think about how much birthday cake you're going to avoid eating if you're not snacking on it for the next hour while you're cleaning up your kitchen, right? Setting a time at night for eating to end. I actually was just talking to a friend last week who said that her goal is always to say 7 o'clock. She doesn't eat past 7 o'clock. And we were actually at a party at about 8 o'clock. And she said, this is the one exception that I'm making this month. But normally I just always say 7 o'clock is my cutoff. And I thought that was just really neat. She was willing to make that exception to be at a party, but it was a once in a while exception. And for the most part, when she was home, she wasn't snacking late at night. That's a great weight management tip. I love this one too. This is one that we've started doing this year and it's made a big difference. Just having something healthy on hand that you can always grab. Optifast is actually great for this, even once you're off the full meal replacements and you're not so sick of it, you never want to see it again. But Dr. Shill and I both do this a lot. When we are running to a ball game, we both grab an Optifast, and that's what we have for lunch so that we don't end up stopping at a fast food restaurant. We'll pack peanut butter and jelly for the kids and we'll grab an Optifast. And that just helps kind of keep things under control. And it's a really easy thing. And it doesn't have to be Optifast. If you have something healthy that's just a grab and go, that's kind of your go-to when you don't have time to make something from scratch. And then this is huge, right? Just don't buy junk food just to have it around the house. If you're going to make a birthday cake for your kid, then buy the cake mix. But don't have ice cream that's just on your regular shopping list that's just always in the freezer. Have it on a special occasion, and even better, just don't buy it at all. If you want ice cream, go out to ice cream once a month or something, but don't have it sitting in the house for those times when you do feel stressed, right? Don't have that as a temptation. Don't buy potato chips. Don't buy sodas. I don't know if, again, everybody picks their things that they're willing to give up, and they can be one at a time, but just not having it in stock in your pantry and in your fridge or your freezer can make a big difference. Dr. Shill often says to our patients, just ask yourself the question, is it worth the calories? Do you really want to eat that year-old Hershey's bar you found left over from Easter last year? Is that really worth it to you? Probably not, but is it worth it to you if your friend brings over like a chocolate mousse thing that they spent 6 hours working on for your birthday? That happened to me in January and it was amazing, but that particular thing, that was worth it to me, right? And so just asking yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth the calories? 90% of the time, it's probably not, right? Okay. And then this is just our quick recap as we close up. So focus on stress management first, self-discipline second. Discipline is certainly going to come into play here, and it's a skill that will have to be learned and practiced. But managing our stress first is going to be key to be able to developing that self-discipline in the first place and to be able to maintain it, right? Plan out your portions, proportions, and place for eating, and then stick to it. Be mindful and intentional about goal-supporting and goal-thwarting behaviors. Plan ahead while you're eating out and practice portion control when you're eating at restaurants. Make sustainable rules for yourself on when and where you will eat. And again, sustainable, right? Don't try to tackle that whole list at once. Pick one or two things that you're not doing that feel really doable to you and start practicing those things. And if you go off the rails a few times, then get back on and try again. And little by little, you'll find that you're more and more consistent at it, just if you just keep trying. And start with something that feels manageable. Have something in stock for a healthy grab-and-go option, and ask yourself if it's worth the calories to you. And it's okay that sometimes it is, right, if it's occasional. Eliminate unnecessary junk food from your home and workplace environments. And then the last suggestion that I'm going to leave you with tonight and encourage you to take a few minutes after we close up here is write down your commitments. Look at those lists that we went over tonight and write down one or two things that you think you could change to make your habits healthier. Maybe it's back at the stress management section. What are the things that you could change this week to reduce your stress levels? And maybe it's the eating management section where it's maybe you just say, I'm not eating past 7 p.m. or I'm not going to eat in bed or in my car or any of those kinds of things. But write down one or two of those commitments tonight, and then keep that workbook in a place where you can see it regularly. And go back to those commitments and remind yourself of those commitments, and then keep trying and keep working. And you will find that, we always say this, right? The future is bright as you continue to work and try and work with us and let us encourage you and cheer you on along the way. You will make those changes and you'll see the results that come from them. So thanks for joining us, everybody, again tonight. Take a few minutes, reflect, and write down the things that you've thought of and learned tonight. And we'll be so excited to join with you again next week for another great week talking about eating habits and nutrition. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you next time.